In this lecture, you are going to learn about the causes and consequences of the internment of Japanese Americans and Japanese immigrants during World War II. America's entry into the war left foreign nationals from the belligerent nations in a perilous position. The war spiked the fear of spies abroad and also in the United States. In the U.S., Japanese Americans and American citizens of Japanese descent had dealt with discriminatory policies in the past, but the attack on Pearl Harbor intensified the anti-Japanese sentiments. Propaganda in which the enemy was demonized and dehumanized did not help. Newspapers targeted Japanese and Japanese Americans, and despite the lack of any concrete evidence, Japanese Americans were suspected of remaining loyal to their ancestral land. Anti-Japanese paranoia increased because of a large Japanese presence on the West Coast. On December 7, 1941, just hours after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the FBI rounded up 1,291 Japanese community and religious leaders, arresting them without evidence and freezing their assets. Then the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, begins to target many on suspicion of disloyalty for detainment, hearings, and possible internment under the Alien Enemy Act. Those who received an order for internment were sent to government camps, secured by barbed wire and armed guards. Such internments were supposed to be for cause. Then Lieutenant General John L. DeWitt, leader of the Western Defense Command, believed that the civilian population needed to be taken control of to prevent a repeat of Pearl Harbor. To argue his case, DeWitt prepared a report filled with known falsehoods, such as examples of sabotage that were later revealed to be the result of cattle damaging the power lines. DeWitt suggested the creation of the military zones and Japanese detainment to Secretary of War Henry Smithson and Attorney General Francis Biddle. His original plan included Italians and Germans, though the idea of rounding up European descent Americans was not as popular. Over 10,000 German nationals and a smaller number of Italian nationals were interned at various times in the United States during World War II. But American policies disproportionately targeted Japanese descended populations. At congressional hearings in February 1942, a majority of the testimonies, including those by California Governor Cuthbert L. Olson and State Attorney General Earl Warren, declared that all Japanese should be removed. Then on February 19, 1942, 2 months after Pearl Harbor, FDR succumbing to bad advice and popular opinion, issues Executive Order 9066 to relocate all persons of Japanese ancestry, both citizens and alien, inland outside of the Pacific. To prevent espionage and protect Japanese from harm at hands of Americans who held strong anti-Japanese attitudes. Japanese Americans and Japanese immigrants were called to relocation centers after having to sell land, having licenses revoked, insurance canceled, and boycotts of businesses, and temporarily housed in places like horse stalls, losing their homes and jobs. Internees were shipped to military restricted zones in Washington, Oregon, and California. And under the order, both immigrants and American citizens were detained and placed under the custody of the War Relocation Authority. The civil agency that supervised their relocation to internment camps, taking only what they could carry. Individuals did not receive personalized reviews prior to their internment. This policy of mass exclusion and detention affected over 110,000 Japanese and Japanese descended individuals. 70,000 were American citizens. The government expected not only cooperation, but enthusiastic patriotism. The government marketed war bonds to the internees inside the camps. It established a loyalty oath program, expecting Japanese Americans to swear allegiance to the government that had interned them. Declassified military intelligence shows no known threat from Japanese Americans. Although the exclusion orders were found to have been constitutionally permissible under the vagaries of national security, they were later judged even by the military and judicial leaders of the time to have been a grave injustice against people of Japanese descent. In 1988, President Reagan signed a law that formally apologized for internment and provided reparations to surviving internees. Legislation in 1988 blamed race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership as causes for the internment of Japanese Americans and Japanese immigrants during World War II. That is all for now. Please watch the next video lecture to learn more.